once you, I think, commit to that journey of deep personal development, you're with people to an extent, but then there's a place that you have to go that no one can come with you. And most people don't want to go there, so they hang out by the water fountain, by the coffee machine, hanging out there. Not a nice place to go when you see yourself, because you see all of your fears, you see all the things that you don't like about yourself, and they continually keep showing up. I know my underlying desire is to always discover, always learn. And I like being around people who have the same commitment to learning. And if I'm around those people, great. If I'm not, that's okay as well. You know, I'm at peace with that.
Thank you so much for joining me, Tony. This is so exciting to have you here and to tell your story. Like, what an opportunity and an honor to be here. So thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
So this conversation is to get to know who you are, what you do, how you grew up, and how that has led you to become who you are now. And so I love to kind of break the conversation into like the early, the middle, and the now, and getting to know your upbringing and kind of what kind of cultural things informed you to create your companies, but also like how has that made you a person as well. So first off, can you introduce yourself, your name, and what you do?
My name is Tony Anagor, and I mean, I would call myself many different things, but I'm a leadership coach. I'm a negotiation skills trainer, and also an entrepreneur. And then most importantly, I'm a father and a husband.
And where would you say your cultural background is, and where are you from?
My cultural background is Nigerian. My parents came from Nigeria in the 60s to live in London. I was born and raised in London. So I would say that my cultural background is a real unique blend of Nigerian heritage and British culture.
Mm. And how did you marry the two when you were younger? Because those are quite kind of conflicting identities, like Nigerian parents in a British context.
Yeah, good question. I struggled. It definitely was a struggle because the two cultures seemed in some ways diametrically opposed. I remember growing up, um, one of my biggest memories is I just remember that my friends had much more freedom than I was afforded as a child. And I remember just going home and feeling that I was going home, and it was jail, right? I was going home, everything locked down. Whereas my friends would go home and they would literally dump their bags, maybe grab something to eat, and then they'd be out. And so I remember that. And I also remember it was, my parents were very, very disciplined, very strict with us. And, you know, at the time I struggled to understand why, because none of my friends had the same level of pressure that I felt that I had. And I was the eldest as well. I was the eldest. And so that comes in Nigerian culture, that comes with another high level of pressure as well, being the eldest.
So how did you see yourself as a young person back then? And what kind of like ambitions and thoughts did you have for your life? Even though your parents were very disciplined, was that a path that you wanted to follow, or like what was in your mind at that time?
No, see, I'm a rebel at heart, but not a bad rebel. I just want to know why. I'm really curious, and I remember, you know, growing up just wanting to know why. That was my big thing. Why is it like this? Why? And when I was a child, that especially in the African culture, you know, don't ask stupid questions. You don't ask questions, right? And but it was just a natural curiosity that I had. And my parents even now will say, if you tell my son not to do it, that's exactly the thing it will do. And that's not because I'm being stubborn, it's just I want to know why, right? And I felt that one thing about our childhood growing up is there was never a why. You know, you're a child, so just do as I say. And so that I think that drove me to being really, really curious. And that often led me into trouble.
And whenever you would express your curiosity, would
Yeah.
you get anything back, or were you quiet? Were you loud? How did you like?
Yeah, sounds crazy, but I was a real introvert as a child. So my sister died when I was 5, and she was my best friend. And once she died, a piece of me kind of went with her. She was older than me,
Mm.
and I actually had what they call, now I know it's called a puka, which is a childhood imaginary friend
Mm.
called Jodie. And I always remember that when Brenda died, I had this friend that I would talk to, and everyone would think I was crazy, but I would talk to this imaginary friend. And I just remember spending so much time alone and thinking for a very long time. I was in my room, and my dad would always say, your books are your friends. Spend time in your room with your books. So I was never allowed out, but I spent a lot of time in my room thinking. So I've got a really kind of crazy imagination, but that's because it's been developed as a child. And then I also stuttered as a child, so I couldn't talk very well. And so that made it difficult for me. Even I used to have these thoughts, but I couldn't express them well enough because I would stutter. And if I would stutter, people would laugh. So all those things combined meant that I was actually quite an introverted character, certainly in my early years at school.
But then that's interesting that it marries with your curiosity of like you feeling like you're still a rebel at heart.
Yeah.
Because if you're not feeling like you're able to communicate, like someone might take that and just shut down, where it seemed to like spur you on and be even more curious. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I've never really thought about it like that. But I think I used to read a lot of books. I used to read a lot of adventure books, Willard Price. Um, there were these adventure books that I would read. I would read Doctor Who, all of these science fiction adventure books, and because they would take me into places that would help unlock my imagination. And so I remember, literally, I had another world. I could sit for hours in this other world, just imagining things. I remember one of my it's still a lasting memory. Is it in this other world? I used to go and sit, and I used to lie on a horse, and there would be a lion next to me. And it was really funny because, of course, lions and horses don't mix. But in this world, it was, all these things were possible, and I used to create things in that world, and just have so much fun. And that made me just the curious person that I was. And then I think it died at some point. Actually died when I started dating, when I started meeting. If I'm honest,
And you're trying to impress people.
if I'm honest, I think that kind of stuff, it didn't really, the geeky stuff wasn't really what I thought the ladies the
Mm.
ladies really like.
And how did you see yourself?
Hmm.
Like, what were you confident? Did you feel like, yeah, like how did you feel within yourself?
Not confident at all. No, no. I had an image of myself that was. Have you ever seen that photo where there's a cat, a little kitten, and then there's shadow, there's a lion. And so I had this image that I wanted to be that lion. I always felt that I could be better than I was. Um, but then there was always this voice, like the imposter syndrome. I really, yeah, had low confidence. And as I grew older, I really found that I had to uh, fight against that in order to get the things I wanted. And there was a change. I remember reading a book by Susan Jeffers called "Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway," and that really changed my perspective on what it feels like to actually be on the other side of fear.
And how did you work through your stutter and stuff like that? When did that start and stop?
Hmm. How did I work through my stutter? I don't know. It just I. If you listen to me carefully, it's still there.
Mm.
But I think I stopped focusing on it.
Mm.
But it was that bad. But people who know me well, if you listen to me carefully when I'm in free flow conversation, it's still there. But I don't know. Yeah.
And what age were you when you read this defining book that then shifted your perspective? Like, I loved what you said there about, from what I understand, you're saying like you had the will
Hmm.
to change, you had the will to want something different for your life, even though
Yeah.
you might not have been where you wanted to be.
Yeah. So I think my overriding feeling growing up was um, I want to be me. I remember with my parents, they wanted me to be what they wanted. me to be, but I wanted to be me. And that was an overriding battle almost every day from the age of maybe 6 until probably about 19. It was always that battle. And then I say 19 because that's when I went to university. And then I realized I've been battling to just be me. And then I realized I didn't know who me was, right? So I'd been so busy battling against my parents and what I called the regime to be me. I just want to be me. And then finally, when I had that opportunity to be me, I didn't know who I was. And that's what set me on a path of self-discovery, which I'm still on today. And I find it really refreshing and humbling to be on that journey all the time and just discovering new parts of me all the time.
But even as like a young man to
Mm,
even have those thoughts, like as a
yeah,
19-year-old, to even like have the emotional intelligence, like that seems to have drawn back from a very young age. Like you've had that awareness about yourself,
yeah.
even if you may not have been able to articulate at that time,
Mm.
to want to be yourself. That's so interesting to have that, like just that awareness at such a young age. Do you not think?
Well, I think it's if you're pushed one way, there's a natural tendency for you to be curious about, what am I being pushed away from? What's so bad on the other side? I think it's a human tendency, right?
Mm.
Adam and Eve, the apple,
Mm.
don't eat the apple. Well, let me have a taste and see what happens. So I think I was driven by that.
Mm.
What is it that's so bad about the person I want to be that they want me to be someone else? And um, and also because I spent a lot of time on my own, I developed what I don't know what I would call it. I used to call it left hand thinking. So I developed a different way of thinking, a different way of seeing things. And I always knew that I would be in the situations and I would see things differently. And I wouldn't always say it, but I would see things differently. And I knew that from a young age. And so, my friends were into cars. I remember growing up, they were into cars and you know, going out partying. And I wasn't really into cars that much, and I enjoyed going out partying, but I was always interested in the other stuff as well, the geeky stuff, I would go on as I got older, going on personal development retreats, and I would go away for weekends or days, and I would just do this personal development stuff. And I remember friends thought that I had some crazy lover somewhere that, where's this guy going, right? He's a 19, 20-year-old and he's going off on 2, 3 days to go and discover himself, right? So, yeah, I think it's a red thread that's run through everything I've been doing. Oh, yeah. So I definitely was, I grew up with a sense that I knew I was different, you know. And so I guess the fact that I knew I was different drove me to do different things and look for different things. And really, I was just looking to find myself, right? And self-help, personal development, I think they prey on people who want more. And if you're not careful, you can be a junkie for that kind of stuff, and you can fall into a trap where it can be quite detrimental, right? Where you rely on that and it becomes a crutch. But for me, I was really clear about what I wanted and how I wanted to do it, and so I started looking for. How did I first get into it? Yeah, as I said, I remember the first book was Susan Jeffers, How to Win Friends. I'm sorry, no, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And then I read Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And that once I read that, then I actually realized, oh, there's a playbook for this stuff, right? There is information out there on how people have overcome their challenges and been able to achieve what it even greater than they could possibly have imagined. And that was something that was good for me. And I also have to say that even though my parents were very strict, I did come from a family where my parents wanted me, the best for me. So they did push me. I remember, my mum was kind of hugs and cuddles, and no matter what you do, I'll always love you. But my dad was a strict disciplinarian. And so my mum wouldn't let me go out because, oh, I don't want my son to go out because I love you. I want you to be here. My dad wouldn't let me go out because he wanted to make sure that he had me under his wing and he was disciplining me and making sure, he knew what I was doing. So I felt not being able to develop because either too much love, on one side, or too much discipline. But that then created something that was just very curious inside me. And then once I got on this path, the funny thing was, mum and dad just opened up and said, off you go. That was the weird thing. Around 19, when I got into university, they literally just said, okay, off you go, fly. But the funny thing was, when they said that, I felt that I had so much catching up to do. I remember at the age of 19 thinking, I wish I could have done this when I was 16 or had this level of freedom when I was 16. And I think maybe that's another one of my drivers as well, that there's so much catching up to do.
What did you learn about yourself in these personal development retreats?
Yeah, I learned that I was probably my own worst enemy. There was a voice going on inside my head that had been created because of my surroundings, but that voice wasn't me, it was a voice. Um, and naturally, that voice is negative. Naturally, that voice will tell me I can't. Uh, I grew up in a situation that was racially tense as well in London growing up. Uh, there weren't many people that looked like me in my school, in my area. And I used to run the gauntlet of racism going to school, where I had to travel to school. So, I had all these battles that I used to get into fights a lot all the time with them. You know, none of it was my fault. That's what I told myself, right? None of it was my fault. But then it made me very angry. So I remember just being very angry as a youth, very, very angry. And it was almost like, well, if you're going to attack me, I'll attack first. And I developed quite um, a conflict-driven attitude. I looked for trouble, I looked for fights, and I'm not proud to say it, but I did. I got into a lot of fights, but it was me trying to express that inner part of me that just wanted to be accepted.
And that kind of mindset is very heavy. Like when you're looking for things,
Yeah,
because therefore you're just constantly being triggered by something.
yeah,
Even though like racism is such a tricky thing because it's not your fault.
yeah,
Like someone has just decided that
yeah,
they don't like you because of your skin color.
yeah,
But there's a lot of work that needs to be done
yeah,
that you don't become a victim of it
yeah,
and that you don't use that as an excuse not to do something.
yeah, correct.
How did you find that?
Hard, very, very, very hard. Yeah. Um, yeah, I just remember, the whole gamut of emotions from hating myself because they hated me, hating them because they hated me, hating everybody. Um, and when I started doing this personal development, I just remember it was just like a big cauldron of mixture of emotions. And then what came out of it was, um, you can't control what's going on out there. You can only control yourself. And that's when I just started working, on myself. Very, very, very hard.
How did you then reframe and change how you saw yourself? How did you remove all the hate?
So what I learned to do was um, get my thoughts down on paper. I think that's really, really important. I used to have a diary or several diaries, and I would write my feelings in that moment. I would come home from school and I would write exactly how I felt. I wouldn't really write so much about what happened in that day, but how I felt about what happened. And so I was left with a compendium of scale of my emotions, how I would feel. And so I learned at a younger age to really name my emotions. And then looking at them, it enabled me to have much more control over them. So I remember doing that. I remember writing a lot. And I also remember um, once, yeah, my mum found my diary and she read it, and I'd literally poured my heart into what I was feeling, and it was a really bad, terrible moment for me, having, reading my diary. But there were highs and lows in there. Um, but her reaction kind of surprised me. I thought she was going to come out, angry and screaming and shouting, but she didn't say anything. But I knew she'd read my diary because it wasn't where I'd left it. But she didn't mention it to me. And so what I did is then I started writing in code. So I had a code. It was a really weird code. I can still remember the code, but I can't read it anymore. So for every letter, let's say it was a B. B was number 2, but I would add 3 onto that. And so I would write letters, which was the letter of the word plus it's a crazy thing, but I could read it, right? And so then I started writing diaries in that. So I think the idea of taking my feelings, putting them into words, and then putting them into code really helped me learn to get in touch with my feelings. And I think the biggest thing that I learned to really deal with this rage was I gave the rage a name, right? Um, and it was called Tame, Taim, the animal inside me. And I remember writing this story about Tame and saying, when he comes out, he doesn't care about you. He doesn't care about anybody. He just wants to wreck things. He wants to hurt people. He wants to cause carnage, and he doesn't care. And I remember writing that. I must have been around about 1920. And just seeing that in writing really enabled me to think, okay, right. Now that I've named it, I can actually learn to not get rid of it because I need it. He's there to protect me as well, but to channel that in the right way.
I love that. And I think get into your story around how you created your business and stuff, but I think when someone can hear that you've walked the walk,
Yeah.
that you can really help like people that are struggling with communication, leadership, you've really dealt with your inner stuff to then come through the other side, and that you're still
Yeah.
navigating it all these years in life. Like I think that really helps people because you're not just sitting there from the sidelines being like, do this, do this. You've
Yeah.
walked the walk. So that's a separate point. What did you want to do with your life at that point at 19, 20? How did you see, like, what did you want to do? Like, where did you want to go?
Yeah.
Because you're obviously working
Yeah.
within yourself. And then what were your dreams and aspirations outside of that?
Yeah. I just wanted a big car, flashy suits, money, my own apartment, just to be myself. I remember that was my dream. And when I finished university, I went to see a cousin of mine who's my mentor and still today my hero. And I went to go and see him. He was living in Philadelphia. And I remember he had a beautiful BMW. He was wearing a suit to work and he just looked just so cool. So I dedicated myself that's what I wanted to be. And so I remember my first job I was a medical rep, and I was working for Novartis. I remember I had a company car, and I would go to work in suits, and I thought, yeah, that's it. I've made it. And then I remember I also bought a flat when I was in this company, and I remember one of my managers when I was buying the flat, the bank had to contact my company to ensure that I could pay the mortgage. And I didn't know this. And we were in a meeting and my manager said, "Oh, we hear Tony's buying a flat. I think we're paying him too much money." And he said it in front of everyone in the meeting. And I just remember being so embarrassed. And I made a mental note to myself that I just didn't want to work for anybody anymore. I couldn't work in a corporate company because it just felt scary to me. So then my idea for myself switched. It was more, I wanted to build something. I wanted to build something that would uh, help and impact people around the world of communication. And it's really funny because when I was in Novartis, this is probably about maybe 35 years ago, I wrote down on a sheet of paper, and I still have it till today. I wrote down on a sheet of paper what it was I wanted to do in the company. So I wanted actually to be a trainer in the company. And my plan was to work hard and work my way up and become a trainer in Novartis. And I saw that not so long ago, but I've got it written down there. So it's no accident that I ended up where I am, because this was written down over 30 years ago.
So interesting.
Yeah.
So, and then you got your taste of the corporate world. You then decided this isn't for me.
Yeah.
What happened next?
Yeah. So I bought a book called People, Politics, and How to Play the Game, because I just wanted to understand it. And uh, I remember reading the book, and it would talk about certain characters in teams, in companies. So you had the the person who, if you join into a team new, and you had the person who was just about to retire. You had the person who's been there for a long time, and they're jaded, and they're somebody to watch out for, because they see you as somebody new coming in. And if you're new coming in, they'll see you as a threat, or they see you as somebody, oh, I was there 20 years ago, so I'm going to really try and scupper this person's chances. And then there was the other person, the new person who joined a few months before you, and they really saw you as a threat. And I remember reading this and seeing, and then in Novartis, seeing all these personalities that I was reading about, and I thought, there must be another way, right? There must be a way, for me to be able to shine and do my best work and not have to deal with that, and for them not to see me as a threat. But it wasn't there. So that's why, as I said, I left. Um, and yeah, after that, I think I just got involved in doing various jobs that would allow me to stretch myself a bit, learn more about myself. I liked sales, communicating with people, so I did quite a few sales jobs. Um, I got into business with some friends, which again stretched me a little bit more. Um, but nothing quite seemed, it was like nothing really filled my soul until obviously now, until what I'm doing now.
Mhm. So, what was the beginning then stages of piecing things together? Like you're trying all these different things, which is a great thing to do in your 20s.
Yeah,
I assume
yeah,
that's when you're in your 20s,
yeah, yeah,
figuring it out. It's always great to start businesses.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
always good to kind of like I think creating a business is very much a personal development journey
yeah,
forever. The level of where your business is always in correlation to where you're at within
yeah,
yourself.
yeah, yeah.
So when was the point of like you understanding what you could help people with? And then what was it like at the very beginning of that?
Well, I think it was more, I didn't really think I could help people. That wasn't the driver. The driver was, hey, I'm doing some work on myself, and I've done some work on myself, and I'd just like to share it with you. Maybe there might be something in my journey that can help you. But it wasn't driven by, I know I can help you, I'm your guru. That was definitely not the case. It was more, I'd read books and I wanted to share. I'd done courses and I wanted to share. And so I started to build a network of people around me who would listen to some of the stuff, and we would exchange notes and share stuff. And then I wasn't such a weirdo, right? Because I was around more people that thought the same. And then I would always find myself taking information. I remember once I did a course, the Anthony Robbins. He came to London. Oh, this must have been about 30 years ago again. And he was fresh, he was new.
Yeah.
It was his first trip to the UK, 8,000 people, Alexandra Palace. And it was the UPW, so Unleash the Power Within. And I'd read his book,
Mm-hmm.
and now here he is. And I remember, going on the course and seeing all these people in the room, and different ages, different races. And we were all there for one thing, just to develop ourselves and be better. And I think that was probably my first taste of, yeah, you can help other people. That was my first taste when I came off the Anthony Robbins course. We did the fire walk and everything. And I remember when I came off the course, I was changed. Everyone around me said, you were a changed person. And that was probably the inflection point.
And did you feel like you were kind of like an evangelist? Like you've got this like awakening within inside and you just want to like go do things, or was it kind of like a slow burn after that of like the next, like what was the next step?
Yeah, no, I was ready to explode. Yeah. I remember just coming off, and I remember the last thing that Anthony Robbins said was, "Be careful who going back into your circles now, because they're still seeing the other Tony, and this is going to be a new person coming in, and many of them may not be able to handle this. So ease your way in." But I I just exploded, and yeah, I don't think I've ever stopped since, to be honest.
Yeah. And that's such a powerful feeling to have as a young person to
Yeah,
like, and it's painful as well because the person that you're becoming versus the person that people see you,
yeah,
the gap gets wider and
yeah,
wider,
yeah,
and you have to make a path, a choice of like what path are you going to take.
yeah,
And it sounds like you chose the path of you. That
yeah,
continuation of wanting to get to know who you are and
yeah,
your goal was to be yourself. Was
yeah,
that, were you closer to that?
yeah. And the thing about that is, it's actually a very lonely journey.
Yeah.
Um, I'm 55, no, 56 now, and I can tell you that most of that journey I've done on my own.
Mm.
uh, you meet people. So they say I'm a Capricorn, so a goat, right? We climb up the mountain. If you want to come with us, that's great. Let's go together. But I'm still going, whether you come or not. And I find a lot of that journey, I do it on my own, and I don't want to. I really do enjoy being around other people. Um, yeah, but you realize not everyone's going your way. So once you, I think, commit to that journey of deep personal development, you're with people to an extent, but then there's a place that you have to go that no one can come with you. And most people don't want to go there. So they hang out by the water fountain, by the coffee machine, hanging out there. But you've got to go to this place. And that place is dark. Um, it's lonely. Uh, it's scary. And it's not a nice place to go when you see yourself, because you see all of your fears. You see all the things that you don't like about yourself, and they continually keep showing up. Um, yeah. And then there was a time I actually sometimes found myself being resentful that other people don't want to do this journey as well, right? And so that would mean, with
Separate.
my friends, I would separate with friends, because I was told a lot by my friends that, you just push too hard. You're too, I can't keep up with you. And and I don't feel I'm running that fast, but I just feel that I have this desire to always want to go, and but when I look back, I realize it was probably tough for a lot of my friends, actually, when I think about
Mhm. And it's challenging too, because it's like there's a level of not being able to connect with people because
it. Yeah, yeah,
you're over here and to you it doesn't seem like a big deal, but for them, like
yeah,
the people, just you're in a different frequency,
yeah,
and it's very hard for people to tune into your
yeah,
frequency
yeah,
and the depth and the richness that you want to have within your life.
yeah.
Did you ever struggle with like trying to conform and dim your light, or have you always been a person just to kind of, because that it takes a lot of courage to do what you've done.
Yeah,
I love that analogy of you saying like, I'm gonna go regardless if someone's beside me or not, because a
yeah,
lot of people would choose the route of let me just water myself down just to fit in and belong.
yeah,
Was that ever in play for you?
yeah. Of course, yeah. It's a pendulum swing, and sometimes you feel you have to conform. Yeah, you, you have to go along to get along, and and then other times no. So I don't think, what I've learned now is to take it in stages. There's sometimes I just feel, okay, today's going to be that day, right? And other days not, right? And you get to the point where I'm not pressuring myself one way or another. I know my underlying desire is to always discover, always learn. And I like being around people who have the same commitment to learning. And if I'm around those people, great. If I'm not, that's okay as well. I'm at peace with that.
And when did you take the shift then of like really starting to lay the foundations? Like, what is it that
Yeah.
you do, and where did that start from?
So I set up a company in Spain. So I came to Barcelona. I came to Barcelona about 25 years ago, and I was in between jobs. I was in between relationships, and I just thought it would be just some fun. And so I really was just discovering myself, and I thought, let me just try a few things. And I did some telesales jobs. I did some English teaching, just for maybe 18 months or so, and then I met someone who's now my wife. And that's when I realized, well, I probably need something stable here, right? I need to think about something that will keep me here in Spain, because uh, I saw a potential of being with this person. And so I had to really think about what it was I wanted to do. And actually, I'd fallen into setting up a business that was in travel and tourism. I fell into that. I'd worked with other people before as a second, right? They'd set up the business and I was like a business partner-ish. And actually, I remember on two occasions, two different businesses, I remember them, one person saying, Tony will always be a great number two. He'll never be a great number one, but he'll always be a great number two. And then I heard someone else say exactly the same thing. Yeah, he's a great co-pilot. If you ever need a co-pilot, go for Tony. And that made me really look at myself. Is that really what you want to be? A number two? And especially when I knew I wanted to be a number one, but I was hiding behind this number two, because it was I was protecting myself. It was safe having somebody else there. And I think those two comments really pushed me to say, right, I'm setting up my own company. So that was 25 years ago. And I set up a company in Barcelona in the travel and tourism industry, only because I couldn't speak Spanish. And like many people, and at that time, a lot of people were just trying things out, and it seemed like a cool thing to do. And it was a lot of fun. We did some really, really cool things. I loved Barcelona. I loved the effervescence and the vibe of the city. And so I wanted to share that with other people who were coming. And so we set up a company which was offering these really cool, unique activities, not tourist activities, but really cool things in those days, that when people would come to Barcelona, they wouldn't just enjoy, but they would experience something unique, like an air balloon ride, or driving a Formula One car on a Formula One track, or traveling with the FC Barcelona players. Something that would really anchor in their experience of of visiting Barcelona and doing something. And so that was the plan initially. And that went for, yeah, we ran that for maybe 5, 6 years. It was a great business. I think I had maybe 17 people, and it was just a cool lifestyle business. Uh, but then we started noticing that we wanted to go higher up the chain and get involved with companies. And so we started offering corporate activities. We took a license out and started offering corporate activities and doing more corporate stuff. And that's when I noticed companies would bring their teams over for like some kind of team building, this kind of stuff, and then they would have a great time and then go back. And I would always wonder, what's the ROI? What's the return on investment? Why are they bringing these people over? What are they expecting to get out of it? And I would observe. And I remember sitting and watching companies and watching them bring people over, and watching how the managers interacted with the staff, and sometimes the chairman or the chairwoman or the vice president would be there, and you could see the interaction. And I just remember just thinking that dynamics is incredible, right? Bearing in mind I hadn't worked for a corporate company for a long time. And so I think the seed started being sown in my mind that I think there's more work that can be done to make these team meetings more effective. And that was probably about 20 years ago. I started thinking, yeah, we can do something more, but I didn't know what. And then concurrently, I got to a place in my business where I was the bottleneck and I couldn't push it any further. So I joined an organization that helped entrepreneurs scale their businesses. And at the same time, I also started looking for a coach to help coach me. And I couldn't find a coach. So I decided to go and do a coaching certification, not to be a coach, but because I wanted to coach myself. And that was another change for me, because I did the certification and I loved it so much. I realized that this is what I want to do, right? You mean I can ask questions. I can ask questions, and I can help shape your thinking, and I can maybe look at some of the blind spots that you haven't been looking at, and I can share some of my experience. I mean, this is what I've been doing for the last 20, 30 years. And so now I can put this all together and I can help people. So that's probably the turning point. When I did that coaching course, I came back. Um, and as part of that, you had to coach certain people for, I can't remember the details, but I think I had to coach maybe 10 people for 4 sessions each as part of my training. And yeah, I never looked back. That was it.
So there's so many threads here that I'm connecting the dots. So I love the aspect of the experiences that you're creating, which ties back to the imagination that you had as a child.
Hmm.
Feels like all the books that you've read and the
Yeah,
imagination
yeah,
and the stretching of just like a different reality. It's like you created that within this crossover or the lifestyle business.
yeah,
And then your passion and your obsession and your love for the depth and understanding of yourself, you can now give it to other people.
yeah,
It's like you've done this 30 years of work really at
yeah,
this
yeah,
point.
yeah,
It's not just you had one certification. It's like this was like what you were kind of already
yeah,
meant
yeah,
to be doing. So
yeah,
it's like this alignment of you finally accepting who you are. And I always find the things that we find shameful as a child is our
mm,
biggest strength
yeah,
as an adult that you can then like find your purpose.
yeah,
How does that statement sit with you?
yeah. You remind me of something my dad used to tell me when I was a kid. And I didn't really share much about the traumas I was going through, the racial issues I was going through, because I knew they were going through it as
Mm.
well. And that coupled with the fact that I didn't know how to communicate, w- it was difficult for me to articulate what I was going through, and I didn't understand. But there was once I remember I came home and it was just too much, and I said, Dad, everyone at school keeps laughing at me because I'm different. And he sat me down. He said, you should be laughing at them because they're all the same. And that was a reframe for me. And it wasn't that they're all the same, as in, they all look the same, but I knew I was different. As so, what he was trying to say to me is celebrate your individuality, right? Celebrate your difference, celebrate that. But as a young kid, your desire is to want to fit in. And so it ran counterintuitive to what I needed at that moment. But those words were what they kicked back in when I was like 19, 20. And they really, helped me sail through those years.
So you've got the coaching certification.
Yeah,
What happens next? You've coached 10 people. You're then on this like momentum of like, okay, did
yeah,
you have another like evangelic moment of like the way that you felt after Tony Robbins of
yeah,
like, this is the thing, I've learned so much, I've unlocked something.
yeah, yeah. I mean, this is a really interesting conversation because you're asking me questions that I've never asked myself, and I really thought about it. But now that I think about it, when I got the certification, one of the people that I coached was someone who was working as a professor at IESE University, which is one of the top business schools in Europe. And he was a professor of communication skills at the university. And we'd become friends. And so I coached him just, it was just like a session because it was part of the program. So, and I remember we went for a coffee and we had a conversation and I asked him a few questions and we got along really well in that conversation. Little did I know, a few weeks later, he said, Tony, the question that you asked me both drove me crazy and drove me to areas of new discovery for myself at the same time. And he said, I don't know what you did, but I can't stop that question ringing around in my head. And then he was teaching a communications course at the business school, and he invited me to come in and just watch. And I saw him in action, and I saw him teaching. I was like, "You're teaching communication skills. I mean, this is the stuff that I love. you mean you can actually teach this? And he taught it in such a way. I mean, this guy was a real pro. And, we're still very good friends to this very day. And I remember watching him very carefully, and he must have picked up on something, because at the end of the session, he said, Tony, I want you to take this class, and I want you to take them next door. And I want you to also teach them, take them for a session. And I said, so what do you want me to say? He said, I think you know exactly what you need to say, and I'm trusting that you do. And he looked me right in the eye like that. And that him placing that confidence in me, that sparked something. I remember that. I remember thinking, feel the fear and do it anyway. And so I went in with the class, and don't ask me what I said, what I did, but I remember I delivered. And that was 16 years ago. And I still teach at the business school today. And that was definitely a turning point for me.
And that's such a compliment when someone says, you've asked me questions that I've never thought about before.
Yeah.
Like the fact that you had that impact on someone. And it's just like, it's a correlation of like the self-discovery, the things that you've been, and also like you've always felt different. So therefore your perspective is different, and you're seeing things from a bird's eye view.
Yeah.
So you're not coming in as just like a typical coach of like, this is what we do. You're genuinely curious, you're listening to the person, and you're taking things apart and re-putting it together. To you, it's normal, but to someone else, it's like you've completely like shifted how I changed that perspective.
Yeah, that's quite right. Yeah, and I think the more I mean, I've been doing it for 15, 16 years now, and so the more I do it, the more I'm able to tap into. You mentioned authenticity, into that authentic part that I might be talking to you, and something comes up that if I was following the coaching rule book, I would never ask that question.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't feel authentic not to ask it or not to say it. And I think it doesn't work for everybody. Not everybody likes that style, but I attract the people into my life that require that, right? That need that. And I think I class myself very, very lucky to be able to, do the stuff I do, do the work I do.
So how did you come about doing negotiation, emotional negotiation? Like, where did that even come from as an idea to then you have your coaching, you have the business, you have all this, and then you've kind of, I know it's communication, but it's very specific type of thing.
Yeah. So it come full circle for me because, as I said, I've been teaching communication, and I teach, so and as the leadership coach, so you've got the communication, the leadership stuff, and it all comes under the same umbrella, because the majority of the challenges that I find leaders have is communication with themselves and then with others. And then I think I had a realization one day when I thought, well, when I was younger, I used to fight a lot. I used to conjure up conflict to be able to channel my anger, right? And now I don't. Now I'm able to go into conflict. Not every situation, by the way. So I'm not. I wouldn't. I'm not the finished article, but I'm not afraid of conflict. I'm able to walk into these kind of situations and really, in a brave way, try and work out where the differences are and have those conversations. And I notice as a part of communication, that's one area that a lot of people don't focus on: how we deal with conflict, how we deal with differences of opinion. And this became quite clear to me probably about 6 years ago. And it was a situation where I was working with somebody on a project, and that person had expectations of me to deliver in a specific way. And I hadn't delivered because I had other expectations. And so I remember that person called me up in the office and was screaming and shouting at me down the phone. And I remember thinking, right now, the way I feel is you're attacking me, right? I'll let me attack back. That was my initial feeling. And then something came over me and said, well, look, he's shouting and screaming with such intensity. There's something he cares about. There's something behind this. What would happen if we got to what he really cares about? What would happen if we did? Let's be curious about what is it. And so I said to him when he'd finished in a very calm way, and I said, what I'm hearing from you is a lot of frustration because you care that this project gets delivered, and you probably care even more about the people, the participants of the program. And that's what I'm hearing. Is there anything what I've said that's not correct? And he said, that's exactly it. And I said, believe it or not, I want exactly the same thing. I absolutely want the participants to get the best out of this program. So we're actually on the same side. We're just seeing it in a different way. The conversation went quiet. So how are we going to do this? What is it that you require? What do I require? And I remember that conversation really starkly. And then 2 weeks later, he called me up and he said, I want to learn what you just did to me. I want to learn how to do that because I called up ready for a fight. And how you did that. And that enabled me to think, okay, right, well, these are the things that I want to be able to put into a framework and figure out how can I go into companies and shine a light on some of those hidden conflicts, because most of the conflicts are under the carpet. People don't want to talk about them. They exist. People say silos are being built and silos are built and they don't want silos. I think silos are a great thing. I think silos are a great thing to help companies work effectively because they have a shared language, a shared culture. Where the problem is when we don't build bridges between those silos. And building bridges between the silos is where the magic is. And so I now work with leadership teams, and I go into leadership teams and I listen to the language, listen to the culture, and I listen to how they are interacting with themselves. And I'm almost measuring the level of psychological safety that exists within the team. And then I start working with them on how to build frameworks, real frameworks into uh, uh, first on the leadership level, and then management, and then the rest of the team. So it becomes a culture of how to handle conflict, how to deal with healthy tension.
But it goes back to you and your anger as a
Yeah.
teenage boy of like you said, you're not afraid of it.
Mm.
That's half the battle. Because of what you went through, you've built this
Yeah.
armor and this courage to be like, you just need to face it. You
Yeah.
need to internalize it and figure it out. And it's so interesting that you then almost created this like
Yeah.
it's art from like
Yeah.
what you've created, the tools and the reframe and all that stuff is it's a piece of art that you inject into the company so that they can then take and diffuse everything. Do you ever find companies trying to hide, like you're going in to observe?
Yeah.
Are they ever trying to hide? Oh, we're not like that. We're not that type of company.
Oh, of course. Yeah. 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 I mean, I had somebody the other day, team of 50 people, CEO, startup, said, no, we don't have conflict in our company because we're a small team. We have no conflict. I said, okay. He said, but the only challenge we have is sales, how to get more sales. And I said, okay. Well, so why do you think you're not having more sales? Well, because the sales team don't really understand, what the company needs. The sales team aren't really aligned with the marketing team, but conflicts we don't have. And that's the first thing. So if somebody believes they don't have a conflict, they don't have a conflict. You can't convince. We have a set of principles that we use in emotional intelligence, and the first principle is seek to understand, not to convince. So if I start trying to convince you that you have conflict, you will push back and say no. So that's fine, right? But I also find you said something earlier about um, not being afraid to face these parts, the demons, if you like. I am very afraid. Um, and this is what I say with emotional intelligence. It's being aware of that. There's a big mistake that people make when I talk about emotional intelligence, when I talk about empathy, they equate that with being soft. They equate that with being supplicative, namby-pamby, happy flower, but it's the complete opposite. It's, because I'm doing the work and I've done the work and I continue to do the work, that's the hard stuff. The easy stuff is to lose your temper. It's easy for me just to immediately react to something that you've said. The hard part is for me to feel that feeling and then channel it in the right way. When this guy called me and he was shouting, the easy thing would have been for me just to fight fire with fire and argue back. But what I did was what I believe was the hard stuff. So I really want people to understand that this emotional intelligence is a tough gig. It's really not easy. And just when you think you've got it, just when you think you've got it, that's when it trips you up.
And what do leaders struggle with when you introduce these frameworks? Can you talk us through the different principles, like the 7 principles, and
Yeah,
if there's pushback on that, and then how long do you work with a company to kind of, because even working today,
yeah.
going through all the scripts, I'm like, there's so much
So
there.
yeah,
Like, where do you begin? And like, you almost would need to set up an academy of
yeah,
like, like there's just a lot of emotions
yeah,
to figure out in a professional setting. Sorry,
yeah,
there's like 5 different questions there, but yeah,
yeah,
talk us through the principles.
yeah. So myself and a guy called Lee Smallwood, who he's an entrepreneur, and he is also a tech entrepreneur. He now works in finance in New York. So he and I got together about 5, 6 years ago, and we decided to look at the absolute science, the business cases, and the psychology behind how we negotiate. Because we looked at some of the academic programs, and the academic programs are incredibly good. They're fantastic. Um, but there's an element of that we found that was very academic, and it would send you maybe to a book to read more and more and more, and you can go down a rabbit hole of academia. And also what we found was it's like, imagine I learned boxing reading a book. The moment I get in the ring and get punched in the belly, that's it. It's over, because I haven't had any real world experience. So we looked at that, and then we looked at on the other end, we looked at the world of like hostage negotiation, where these people are out there negotiating hardcore every single day. And then we looked at the place in the middle, which was, okay, what's the psychology behind this? How can we take some of this and some of this, put it together, and look at the psychology behind it? Because that's where the rubber meets the road, the psychology. Um, and we analyzed hundreds and hundreds of negotiations. And so we came up with these principles that we thought that all of these negotiations had in common. And they were based on observations and cognitive biases that we all display. And so the first one was based upon an assumption, a hypothesis, that if you show up for us to have a conversation, for us to have a negotiation, if you show up, there's probably a reason you've shown up. It might not be the same reason I've shown up, but there's a reason that we're sat together. And so based on that, well, we're not enemies. We're not friends, doesn't mean we're friends, but we're not enemies. And so the first principle is your counterpart is not your enemy. And having a look at it from that perspective, it actually gives you access to a different set of resources. If I see you as an enemy, I'm going to come at you as an enemy. If I see you as a friend, that's one thing. But if I see you as neutral, then I remain curious. So the first principle is your counterpart is not your enemy. The second principle is, as I mentioned to you, which was the idea that it's a cognitive bias, naive realism. You look at some information and I look at the same information and I come up with a completely different set of conclusions. And then I think, well, Esther's reading the same stuff I am. How come she's come up with something different? She must be crazy. That's naive realism. And the other one is what we call the boomerang effect, which we've spoken about earlier on, which is, even if I've got the best deal for you, if I oversell it to you, you'll push back. It's the boomerang effect. It's the natural human reaction when somebody is being too pushy, even if it's the right deal for you. So the second principle was seek to understand, not to convince. Let's try and understand, instead of you pushing, let me understand what it is that you want rather than trying to convince you. And the third is based upon the idea that we often go into a negotiation with an idea of what we want. And we go in there and we say, right, this is what we want. And we're really confident pushing for that. But so is the other person. And so The third principle is based around the idea that we need to create value before capturing value. So let's be rigorous and let's be assertive, but let's be assertive in actually creating value. Let's understand what that value looks like to you, to me, and then when it comes to capture value, don't be afraid to take what it is that you want, but only after you've actually created that value. The fourth one is essentially based upon what we call observations around your emotions. So, emotional anxiety. Maybe you've just had an argument with a business partner. I don't know that. We come in to negotiate. Got nothing to do with me whatsoever, but you're suffering from the overhang of a previous conversation. That will have a direct effect on the way you and I actually have that negotiation. Or maybe you find me intimidating, and I don't know that, but you find me intimidating. Again, that will have an effect on the negotiation. I remember I negotiated with a woman who wore glasses on her nose like this and looked at me like that. And she reminded me of my school teacher, my math school teacher. And she made me so nervous. But she didn't know this. Of course, she didn't know. But I remember the feeling that I felt. I felt like a little kid again. And when she would look at me over the top of her glasses, it would just make, I started stuttering again. But this is all stuff that happens, what they say, in the shadows. But it has a direct effect in real time on the negotiation. So the fourth principle is always check the emotional state of the negotiators. So walking into a negotiation, how am I feeling? Actually, my palms are sweating. I'm quite nervous about that. Just the fact that you have named it and checked it for yourself gives you access to a different way in which you negotiate. And also be aware of the other person, how they might be feeling. Number 5, we sometimes often get this tunnel vision when it comes to going in for a deal, right? This is what we want. And, I've seen there's a camera that I want, and it's a bit expensive, but all I think about is this camera. And I have this tunnel vision around this camera, and it's my wife that has helped me and say, well, why don't you look elsewhere? Why don't you do a study on the camera? What is it that you're actually looking for? And maybe there's other cameras out there. And I know this instinctively, it's the right thing to do because I could probably save money, I could do this, but I'm so focused on this one thing. And so principle number 5 targets that and says, never become overinvested in a specific outcome. Because being overinvested in a specific outcome, 2 things happen. One, I get tunnel vision and I forget and I don't see what else is out there that could be even better. And secondly, you pick up on my desperation. And so if I was in a negotiation, you would pick up on that and you could probably use it to manipulate me. So that's principle number 5. Principle number 6 is this is based upon reputation. So I don't know you, but I've done some reading and I hear you to be a fair, strong, tough negotiator. That's your reputation that's coming into the room way before you've come into the room. Fair, tough negotiator. So that means that you have negotiated with other people and you've left them feeling quite good about the negotiation. And so we always say principle number 6 is always leave the negotiator, your counterpart, feeling better than you found them. Even if we don't get the deal, I want you to think I was fair, tough, firm negotiator. Because sometimes all we have is that reputation. If I do a deal with you and we get what we want, but you feel that somehow I've strong-armed you, the deal is likely the wheels will come off the deal at some point. So always leave them feeling better than you found them, even if you don't get the deal. And then finally, the 7th one is, this is based again on an observation. You see some people who think that it looks as if they magic deals out of nowhere, that they're always able to get things right. They're always able to ask the right questions. They're always able to negotiate incredible scenarios out of nowhere. And that's because principle number 7 is once you've imbibed 1 to 6, you realize that negotiation opportunities exist everywhere. So they're the 7 principles. And we go through those with companies and we teach them these frameworks so that they become part and parcel of how they communicate with each other. And you'll be amazed that when teams imbibe this and they start to, oh wait, you're not my enemy. So I'm not, my counterpart's not my enemy. Okay, let's do this. And you'll be amazed at how wonderful it starts to blend. I was working with a group last week, and in Dublin, it was a group of CFOs, and we were going through these 7 principles. And I remember in the break, somebody came up to me and said, I love those 7 principles. I'm going to take them, I'm going to blow them up and put them on my fridge. And I'm going to say to my family, from now on, this is how we communicate.
I love that. And they're bite size, like
Yeah,
your counterpart is not your enemy.
yeah,
Seek to like that one is ingrained
yeah,
in my head. Seek to
yeah.
understand, not to convince. And they're just so powerful. So we were talking earlier about, do you have to walk the walk in
Mm,
order to be able to teach this? And you'd mentioned that you're supposed to be making your call this evening with your friends for the last 3 years,
mm,
every single Monday. You and a few colleagues go
yeah,
through this and
yeah,
talk about it. Just can you share more
yeah,
about
yeah,
that?
yeah. So one of the really important things about the way we teach emotionally intelligent negotiation is that it has to become part of your DNA. We found that sometimes looking at some other frameworks, it became almost robotic, and you were saying the words, but you weren't actually feeling what was underneath. It wasn't part of your natural DNA. And so it's for us, it's really key that it intuitively makes sense, and then it becomes part. So seek to understand, not to convince. That actually intuitively makes sense, and you can bring it to bear in a situation and just be curious about, well, what is it that you're seeing that I'm not seeing? Help me understand that so I can see. Just in that conversation, you and I are beginning to build a bridge of empathy, right? As you start to think, you start to share with me. And so it sounds great on paper, but how do you really put that into practice? And you can only do it by practice. And so we set up a group about 3.5, no, it's actually 4 years ago now, where there are a small group of people who really, really take this to the next level. And without fail, every Monday we meet. One person's in the States, and there are two in the States and 2 here in Europe. And we get together every Monday, and we do a deep dive into emotionally intelligent negotiation. We analyze negotiations that are current, we analyze negotiations that are past, we negotiate with each other, we bring real live negotiations that we actually have ongoing in our lives to the table. Um, we go through the course that we've written. It's 4 levels, so there's a lot of rich information in the course. And we go through the course and we practice over and over again. And we've been doing this for 4 years. Um, and last week we were practicing how to ask great questions. And after 4 years, we're still learning. Right? We're still learning that, a question can be used to deliver information, for example. Or how do you use a question to deliver information? Did you know that of all the negotiations, there are 3 ways that most negotiations fail? Lack of trust, ego, and lack of preparation. So I just asked you a question, right? But I've given you the information. Did you know that most negotiations fail because of this reason? And so we figure out, okay, yeah, I've just asked a question, but actually what I've done is I've delivered you some information. So now you're not questioning the information, it's because the question's already in there. And so we practice these approaches so they become naturally part of us. And 4 years later, we're still learning and we're still trying to make it part of our everyday DNA.
But it feels like you've found the right people that will go to the mountain with you
Yeah.
to really obsess about what it is that you love, and like
Yeah,
knowing everyone's on the same page of really
for
wanting
sure.
to understand this inside and out, and everybody's like in the same frequency.
For sure. For sure. Yeah. Some might call us geeks, maybe even freaks. But I spoke to one of them yesterday, Marta, her name is, and she said, um, anything to do with negotiation and leadership, I'm into, you know. And I asked her why. And she said, because it would make me a better person.
What challenges do you find trying to redefine what negotiation is?
Yeah. Yeah. What a great question that is. So I run a podcast, and on this podcast, I talk to negotiation experts around the world because I'm genuinely interested to see different insights. And it's quite obvious that there are two clear areas where some people are still stuck in the ways of old school negotiation, which has a really bad rap, actually. A majority of people I talk to hate negotiating. And the ones that love it are the ones that love it because they always get what they want, maybe not what the other person wants. The majority of the people that love it are, people who are used to going in and really driving a hard bargain and getting what they want. And what I'm trying to do is expand this part in the middle where people can see that negotiation isn't two executives hammering out a deal to see who can get the most, and a war of attrition to see who gets the most out of each other. A negotiation is a conversation where we both want to come out with something better than we could do on our own. And with our approach, I go into companies, and there are three clear pillars that we work on. The first pillar is, how do we shift the way that companies negotiate internally? So you might have procurement, you might have sales, you might have marketing, you might have finance, and each of them have different KPIs. And so therefore their priorities are different. So how do we have conversations where we can put these priorities together and have a direct focus so that we can break down the way in which we communicate and have the customer in the center, or the company's KPIs in the center, and start working towards that? The second is, how do we build long-term sustainable relationships? Not just because we need the deal for Q2, that we go in and we're going to hammer our clients, make sure that we get the best deal we can for ourselves this quarter. Then what happens in Q3 and Q4? What happens the next year, and next year? So we work on building trust as the center of the relationship. And that's not always easy with companies, but building long-term sustainable relationships around trust, also within companies. So leadership, how do we ensure that leaders can also be vulnerable with members of their team? You start talking like that, and then people get the jitters. But actually, COVID helped a lot. COVID helped people see for the first time that they had members of the team who were totally disengaged, members of the team who they didn't even know very well. I remember working with one particular person, and for the first time, they had to meet their team online. And I was coaching this person, and they said, Tony, I realized I have no idea about my team. I'm used to just, they're going out working and doing the job, but I have no idea. And I asked them, and he said, so how do I start? What do I do? So I said, what's the birthday of, name somebody in your team. And they named it a name. And I said, when's their birthday? What do they do at the weekend? They didn't have an answer. And so his task was go and speak to these people and start finding these questions, getting to know them. And that starts to build empathy, starts to build relationships. So this is what I mean about building long-term sustainable relationships with all stakeholders. And then the third pillar, which is really key, is how do we deal with conflict? So they're the three key pillars: is shifting how companies negotiate internally, building long-term sustainable relationships, and then focusing on how we deal with conflict.
This comes from all the different things that you've gone through.
Can you imagine that? Yeah.
That's
Who would have
so
thunk it?
interesting.
Yeah.
And do you think your younger self would be really proud of the present self of what you've created with your life?
I don't know. I don't know. Well, I do know. And I think the answer is I'm not there yet. So I think my younger self would be pushing me to go even further. I mean, this interview, for example, is my younger self pushing me to go further. I wouldn't, ordinarily, it's not my comfort zone. So yeah, I feel intuitively that there's a lot more to go. There's this is just opening up the door. I feel I'm just beginning. And my dad always said to me when I talk about my dad a lot now. It's weird, right? Now that I'm older, I talk about my dad a lot and the things that he said. But he always used to say, "Your job is to just keep walking, one foot in front of the other. Don't look back. Other people will tell you how far you've come, but you don't. You just keep going, keep going." And yeah, I definitely think that that's his advice that's speaking to me now.
Love that. I absolutely love that. So my last question is, well, two questions. Like, what does your future look like now?
Hmm.
Like, you have the business crossover events. You also have EIN. You've got the coaching. You have all these different
Yeah, yeah,
things, and you're always curious, and you want to push yourself. What's next?
yeah, yeah,
You've also written books as well.
yeah, yeah,
You're an
yeah,
author.
yeah. What's next? So I guess that there maybe three things. So with my conferences company, I'd like to see that grow,
Mm.
although I'm not as involved in it as I was. My partner now runs that, and I'm happy to support that and see that grow. Um, with my coaching and the negotiation, I mean that's together because
Mm.
yeah, I go in and I deliver workshops. I work with leadership teams, and my overall aim is to get people to see conflict in a different way, right? Is to learn these skills to confidently and happily go into these type of healthy tension situations and create stuff. Um, and so I want to do that with as many companies as possible. I've started recently working with US clients. I've been up until now. I've been very Eurocentric, based here in Europe. But I'm now reaching more and more, reaching out to more and more companies in the US, um, only because I just want to stretch myself more,
Mm.
and I want to be in contact with more of those companies. And I think my closing project for life is my podcast. I'm really passionate about my podcast.
Why
I
did you
started
why
it.
did you start it?
Yeah, it was an accident really. I ripped my Achilles heel about 2 years ago. And so the doctor said to me, he looked me in the eye and said, "Tony, you are going to be sat now with your leg up for the next 6 months. So don't think you're going to be doing anything else. The only muscle you're going to use is your finger to point that. I want that. I want that. I want that." And I remember thinking, well, I stand for a living. I teach in front of classes. I'm moving around. And so I came home and I put my leg up and I thought, 6 months. And then, of course, reframe. I thought, well, 6 months. I can do a lot in 6 months, right? I love negotiation. So why don't I just make contact with negotiation experts around the world? Because I normally wouldn't have time. So I went on Google and I just put, who are the top 100 negotiation experts in the world? And a list came up and I just started contacting them one by one. And first I was having Zoom calls. And then after my first 2 or 3 calls, I thought, this is great. I need to share this with the world. So then I set up the podcast. It's called Empathy at the Table. And I'm now on, I think, episode 52, 53. And I'm just having an incredible time speaking to experts around the world. So my plan with this is I want to be able to interview Obama at one point. So if anyone has any contacts, I would love at one point to be able to, they say you're 1 degree away from somebody. Love to be able to invite Barack Obama onto my podcast to talk about empathetic leadership, emotionally intelligent leadership. And I'm also planning on organizing a negotiation summit, which should be next year, where I just want to invite some of the best negotiation experts around the world to bring people together to really talk about the beauty of this crazy word, negotiation.
Beautiful. My last question. What are you learning about yourself?
What am I learning about myself right now? I still have imposter syndrome. Yeah, after everything that I've done, and I still have that voice in there. And actually, that voice is my best friend, because I think without that, I wouldn't be where I am. So I've learned to feel the fear and do it anyway. I've learned to listen to that voice that says, you know, you shouldn't be doing this. Should you be here? Um, what if this goes wrong? What if this happens? What if that happens? And I listen to that and I say, yeah, I hear that, and I'm going to do it anyway.